Sometimes the biggest mysteries are hiding in the most ordinary places. What if I told you that your favorite cheese, yeah, cheese, holds a legal puzzle that's centuries old? Today, we're going to slice right into this fascinating problem that early Islamic jurists found in, of all things, a simple block of cheese.
So picture this. The Prophet Muhammad's followers are offered some cheese from Persia. They're not sure what to do, and his response is reportedly this: take a knife to it, invoke the name of God, and eat. I mean, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? Case closed. So if he said to eat it, where's the problem? What's there to even talk about?
And yet, despite that seemingly clear instruction, this cheese became a huge deal for early Islamic scholars. I'm talking intense debates, which, leads us right to the core question of this whole thing. What was lurking inside this cheese that made it so controversial?
All right, let's get into it. To really wrap our heads around this, we kind of have to put on our cheesemaker hats for a minute. Because believe it or not, the secret to this entire legal drama, it's all in the process of making cheese.
I mean, on the surface, it's pretty simple, right? You start with milk, then you add something to it to make it curdle and form those solids, the curds, and finally, you press those curds together. That's cheese. But the whole mystery, the entire legal problem, is hiding in plain sight, right there in step 2. It's all about the rennet.
So what exactly is rennet? Well, it's basically this enzyme that causes milk to solidify. But here's the kicker, the crucial detail. It comes from the stomach lining of a young animal, and importantly, a dead animal. And as you might know, in Islamic law, it matters a lot how an animal dies.
And this is where we get to a really fundamental legal split. See, if the rennet comes from an animal that was slaughtered the right way, according to Islamic law, then it's pure, it's halal, no problem. But if that animal just died on its own or was slaughtered improperly, it's considered carrion, or meta. And that means its parts, including the rennet, are totally unlawful. That's the conflict. That's the problem buried inside the cheese.
Okay, so the big question becomes, who was actually making this stuff? You have to remember, the early Islamic Empire was this huge, multicultural place. And the cheese? Well, it wasn't just being made by Muslims.
Think about the bustling markets back then. You had this incredible mix of producers. You had Muslims, of course, but you also had Jews and Christians, often called the people of the book, and you had Magians, which was the term for the Zoroastrians, from Persia. And this mix of people making the food, well, that's the key to the whole problem. And this is where we see the legal traditions start to split. For most Sunni jurists, the real issue was specifically magician cheese. Why? Because they generally accepted the slaughter methods of Jews and Christians, but not the magicians. So the animal was considered carrion. But Shiite jurists, they had a much stricter take. For them, the meat from any non-Muslim was off-limits, which suddenly made all non-Muslim cheese a potential minefield.
So this whole situation basically set the stage for a massive legal showdown, and you ended up with two very clear camps, each with a totally different way of looking at it. To make it simple, let's call them the hawks and the doves.
Okay, so the hawks, their view was super simple and restrictive. The logic was, the rennet comes from carrion. Carrion is unclean. Therefore, the cheese is unclean. End of story. Forbidden. But the doves, they took a more liberal, kind of problem-solving approach. They were like, hang on, this cheese should be permitted. They believed Islamic law was sophisticated enough to figure this out. So how in the world did the doves argue their case? I mean, they didn't just shrug and say, meh, it's fine. Oh no. They came up with 3 distinct and honestly pretty brilliant legal arguments to justify eating the cheese. And it really shows you just how sophisticated this legal tradition was.
All right, argument number 1 is basically innocent until proven guilty. It flips the script and puts the burden of proof on the person who says something is forbidden. The idea is, unless you have solid proof, like 2 witnesses who can swear this specific cheese was made with carrion, then you're totally allowed to assume it's lawful and just eat it.
The second argument, this one is all about chemistry, really. It's about ratios. The thinking goes like this. Even if you grant that the rennet is technically unclean, it's such a tiny, tiny amount compared to this huge volume of clean milk. The impurity is basically diluted so much that it's gone, it's vanished, which makes the final product, the cheese, perfectly okay to eat.
Now the third argument, this was the most radical one by far. It just completely changed the whole conversation. They argued that rennet isn't even subject to the laws of carrion to begin with. The logic is fascinating. Only things that have life and can die, like flesh and blood, can become carrion. But rennet, just like milk, is a secretion. It doesn't die, so it can't become impure. Boom. Problem solved. So after all that incredible legal gymnastics, which side actually won? And maybe more importantly, this story has one last, massive twist about where this whole problem even came from in the first place.
Well, the verdict is in, and it's crystal clear. The doves won. Their clever, more liberal arguments for letting people eat the cheese became the mainstream, dominant view in both Sunni and Shiite law. And just like that, the mystery of Magian cheese was, for all intents and purposes, solved and mostly forgotten.
But wait a second, that leaves us with a really fascinating historical puzzle, doesn't it? If the eat the cheese view was so successful and made so much sense, where did that initial super strict, hawkish ban even come from? When you look back, it almost feels out of place, kind of archaic.
And here is the final reveal. Get this. That early, restrictive hawk position in Islam, it's a nearly perfect match for the standard view in Jewish law. Think about it. Both forbid cheese made by outsiders. Both point to the rennet as the #1 problem. And both are worried that the rennet comes from an animal that wasn't slaughtered properly. What's called meta in Islam and nebalah in Judaism. The logic? It's a mirror image.
So what are we to make of that? Is it just a wild coincidence? Or does this ancient debate over something as simple as cheese point to a much deeper shared legal heritage? It really suggests this fascinating moment in history where one legal tradition might have borrowed a problem from its neighbor, only to then spend the next 100 years brilliantly arguing its way to a totally different answer.